Rae Johnston, Uinati, Wiradjuri Yinabaladu. Hello, friends. My name is Rae Johnston, and I'm a Wiradjuri woman. I was born and raised on Darug and Gundagara country, where I have responsibilities to community and to country. And that was my language before, Wiradjuri language, which was taught to me by my grandfather. It was illegal for him to speak his language when he was young, but he kept it safe and passed it on, and I'm really grateful that he did. It is an honour to be living and working today on the unceded land of the Darug people, and I pay my deepest respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to my First Nations brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, and acknowledge that the world's first scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians, medicinal practitioners, game makers are the sovereign First Nations people of this continent and around the world, from the world's oldest continuing cultures, despite all attempts to erase them. I'd like to ask that you too acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that you are on today. And also, wow, what an incredible panel lineup we have for you today. I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with Indigenous people about our experiences and journeys to decolonizing gaming spaces. We're going to be talking today about the misrepresentation and appropriation of Indigenous cultures in gaming, how it continues to tell stories about Indigenous peoples through a colonised lens. You know, Indigenous peoples are the first and original storytellers, and we have centuries worth of culture and knowledge that guide our creativity. So thank you, viewers, for joining us for some deep listening and some perspectives that are very much needed in the games industry more than ever. I'd like to start also by giving a big shout out to Indigitech, to Celeste Carnegie and Ben Armstrong in particular for bringing our wonderful panelists together. I'm going to be starting by giving you a professional introduction to our speakers today, and they will be then introducing themselves culturally. So first up, we have Morgana Watson, who is a cultural consultant, a gamer and anime fan, and the creative director for Four Phase Games. Morgana, welcome.
Kia ora, tēnā nō koe, mō tō mei kua meia, nei rā o ki te mei me te tangi ki koutou e mātaki ana ki ngā iwi take o te ao ki koutou te iwi tūturu o te whenua moemoeā, nā kua no te mei. Thank you so much for having me. This is so great. This is such a cool link up and I'm really excited.
Next up, we have Phoebe Watson, no relation, we just found out, who is an RMIT game design graduate working as a writer, designer and cultural consultant. You might be familiar with her work at Dragon Bear Studios on Enchanted. Great to have you here, Phoebe.
Thanks. It's like so awesome to hear everyone's language. Yeah, and I'm super excited to be part of this panel with some really awesome people.
And last but not least is Matiu Awarāwhiti from Four Phase Games, who has the coolest job title in the world. He's a combat specialist. Matiu, thanks for being here.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou. Ko hukarangi toko maunga, ko waiapu toko awa, ko dukutai mimiha toko waka, ko Ngāti Porou toko iwi, ko Matiu ahau, he kai rako ahau, he kai wero ahau. Anai nei, he kai hanga kimu. So kia ora everybody. And a big thank you for having me and Morgana here. I just want to take a step back and embrace the humbletanga of that beautiful intro that you did for us. Yeah, it really set in place what indigeneity is to me. So yeah, ngā mihi nui ki a koe.
So much. I want to stay with you actually, because I need you to explain to me a little how you become a combat specialist in video games. What was your journey into games? What did that look like?
Oh yeah, so I suppose I started out learning the weaponry of my culture. Yeah, so me and Morgana are Māori from New Zealand, and our culture has a rich tradition and weaponry, all of those sorts of things, and it's not always brutal as well. It's quite a beautiful thing. So I've learnt a lot of those things. Not all of those things. I'll always be learning. It's a big passion of mine. And through that, I actually met Morgana. We're on a related kaupapa, a related, yeah, a related thing. And she said, Matiu, this is how she said it, Matiu, you know Maurako, eh? And from there, we came together, and now, yeah.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
We're making a game.
Beautiful. So, Morgana, we have you to thank for this role being created, which I think may be unique around the world.
Really?
How did you get started in games? What was your journey like?
Well, when I was born, and you know, being a comic book collector and games for a very, very long time, and it was my whole kind of transition into it was that when I was 30, so I'm 43 now. When I was 30, I thought to myself, I can't wait till someone makes like a Māori Tomb Raider or a Māori God of War. And then I turned 40, and I was like, I really can't wait. Like, you know,
no one's done it yet. You got to do it.
And I was like, oh man, like what's happening? So I ended up at this tech event that my friend was facilitating in Tauranga Moana. And and I just saw all these incredible Māori innovators in tech, and they were all speaking, and I just thought if I were to make a game, it would literally be with these people. And that's kind of how it all kicked off. Like I had this story in my head, but I didn't know how to make the game. I needed the people. And so some of them I knew, and some of them I cold called. I made a list, like a dream list of 10 people. And they all said yes, and the team has changed since then.
No way.
Yeah, just through conversations, because there's so few of us in the industry, being Māori that is, we all immediately like link up real easily. Like as soon as we see another Māori in the room, we're like, yo, let's be mates. And that's pretty much how Matiu and I had met. We were in a different group, and still in the gaming scene, but board games and about cultural appropriation. And then I was like, wait a minute, did he train at Te Whare Tūtaua, which is a Māori weaponry school? And I was like, oh, he's a graduate. And I was like,
okay. I didn't train at Te Whare Tūtaua. I trained at another Whare Tūtaua.
But I was just like, oh man, okay, cool. Let's I need someone who knows what they're talking about. And so that's when I asked Matiu.
Beautiful. And Phoebe, you've taken a little bit more of a traditional path to get into games, one that's only existed for a little while though. Tell me about how you got into it.
Yeah, so the way I came into games, it kind of like felt really sudden, like for myself. It wasn't something that I ever imagined myself doing ever. Like in high school, like just from like grade 7 to like year 12, I started wanting to be like a zoologist and then a criminal psychologist. And then that fell into like loving my art subjects and like physical art and painting. And like I took 2 folio subjects in year 12 and didn't care and just like did it all. And I remember looking at the like uni list of like courses that I could take, and I was like really focused on the art courses, but I saw game design on the list, and I was like, I like to play video games. Like I'll never forget the PlayStation 2 that my dad bought me for Christmas as a kid, and my mum putting away like Ratchet and Clank on the top shelf because it had shooting involved. She was like, no. And yeah, so I thought it was cool. But it was still a second thought, even whilst applying. It was just on my list of preferences, actually. And it wasn't until I was actually really lucky enough to get into a few interviews at RMIT University with uni planning and everything. And I remember just coming out of like the fine art course and thinking, this is not it. This is not it at all. And coming out of the game design interview, and like we were having like full on conversations, like back and forth rallying. I was like, Mum, this is what I want to do. Like it makes sense. And I love video games. And it just sounds really cool. So that's how I ended up kind of into it. And I started the course and love all 3 years of it, as tiring and excruciating uni can be.
And you entered the industry while you were still a student. What was that experience like, and what did it make you think about in regards to decolonizing gaming and decolonizing this space, the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, so I had just completed my second year. I was in school holidays, and my dad was running a summer solstice event for community. And I met Kiernan there, and I mentioned that I was at uni for games, and I know someone who needs like an Aboriginal game designer. Let me look them up, and awesome. Not too much was going to happen, and then he had like a great back and forth about the game and what they position. I said, and not to reel on too much, but like personally, I struggled with connection to my own culture. Um, and I struggled to be openly proud. As a kid, it wasn't something that, people were particularly interested in. I wasn't ashamed of who I was, but it wasn't something that I wanted to actively put forth and out there. And I just think didn't really care too much. But, until these people who I was working with were actively keen on getting my culture into a video game, I was like, oh, like maybe there's something here. And the more research that I did in my own culture and intertwining it with games, like it's really brought out my own pride in my culture. Like I've never felt so strong with it. And it was in those same few years, whilst figuring all of that out, I'm realizing this is a whole new space that Indigenous people need to share their stories in. Like we all know stories from games from kids, as remembering the first games we played and the story moments that came along with it, and how impactful that can be. So for people who are already fantastic storytellers, it just seemed obvious. And then you start to look around the rest of the games and you see that clear lacking of representation as well. So it all kind of hit at that same time, which I'm not fully out of that yet. That's still a process.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got Keenan Muir, that is, to thank from Indigenous, who's one of our fellow chicken salt bays in the Indigitech All Indigenous D&D that we play every third Saturday. And we've got a panel at PAX for that as well. So thanks, Keenan, for bringing us Phoebe. We appreciate it. Morgana, what are some of your experiences in regards to the decolonization of games and the importance of that? Why is it something that is important to you? I know it seems so obvious, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
I was just thinking, where do I start?
Yeah, exactly. Hi. We don't have long. 5 minutes, go.
So recently we've just been talking about being able to see the game that we're playing through a Māori lens and through a Māori worldview. And as we build this game and as we tell our stories, we have to keep reminding ourselves or asking ourselves whether or not it is actually Māori, what we're creating, because we all grew up in very westernized games that were created by very, white men. So we're by default, I'll just speak for myself for now, but just by default, when I think of a video game and how it's presented, there's already kind of templates there that that we gravitate towards when it comes to gameplay, movement, world building. There's already defaults there, and so it's kind of undoing. It's the beginning of the undoing of that. And when Amber, Hedia, and myself, we wrote the first story. It's been changed a lot since then, but there some things that haven't changed are how we're represented in a way that is authentic to being Māori. rather than fitting into this little tiny box that we're usually presented with in games. There's a usual trope that comes with RPGs and action adventure games, and we want to be able to tell our story in a way that kind of flips that on its head. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Matiu, what's your experience been like when you look at games and think about decolonizing them? What kind of challenges and obstacles are you seeing?
Yeah, I think along the same lines, because I suppose when I'm thinking about it from an Indigenous point of view, I've really got to decolonize my own way of thinking to begin with, because we've all grown up in that area of being colonized. So I suppose for me, I got to decolonize myself before I even start to create in that zone, because I play a lot of games and none of them are really Maori. None of them are really Indigenous. They're very Western, very like hyper masculine, hyper powers and all that sort of carry on. Yeah.
It is carry on.
Yeah.
Sort of carry on.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I enjoy it in that sense, but I really want, something with a little bit more realness to it.
Hmm.
I think coming from the weaponry side of it is easier to decolonize myself, because in the weaponry sense, if I go in using that sort of fighting technique that you see in games and in movies, I'm going to die. So it's easy to think of how the moves are actually going to work, how they actually look, what the weapons actually do, and all of that is tika, all of that is real, all of that is Indigenous. So yeah, that's me.
Have you seen any examples of games that do it well?
Oh, representing Indigenous. I actually just finished a game of Civ 6 playing as Kupe, and I'm really impressed. I don't actually know who was the cultural consultant for that, but they've done a really good job representing our culture inside of that game. Yeah.
Normally games about colonization generally don't do it too well. We're all just barbarians, no matter where you go all around the world.
Yeah. It's really good because I suppose I take a little bit of Utu and go straight after England, but but we have the power in that game, so it's good.
What about you, Morgana? Have you seen any examples of games that are either made by Indigenous people or are just decolonized and are doing it really well?
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure PAX and our audience will be familiar with Maru Niho. She's been she's been a game maker, Māori woman, been a game maker for years and years and years, like, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 years. Yep. And she created a phone app game called Guardian Maya, and now they're making their big game for console. And they're bringing out some really beautiful stuff. Another tauranga-based game dev team created a game called Umurangi, which is like it's kind of like a neo futuristic photography game. And that was done really well too. It's real, it's modern, but it's Maori. That's quite cool. They won an award not long ago too. But I think one of probably the most famous example of an Indigenous game that just like hits perfectly is Never Alone.
Yes.
That's exactly. You took mine. You took my answer.
By Beth Leponce. So they are First Nations, and that game is stunning.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's perfect in in its autonomy. I think that's the magic to it, is that it's
That's exactly
perfectly what it is. Yeah.
that. I'm incredibly lucky that I was able to work on Never Alone, actually,
Oh,
in
nice.
Australia, as
Awesome.
only on PR, but
Right,
it's all part of
right.
games. It's all part of
Yeah,
games.
totally.
But I
Totally.
worked on PR for them in Australia, and getting to know the team and the way that they approach things, and the fact that they were answering a need of the community, which was, how do we engage our young people
Mm,
who are
mhm.
living in the cities and have a disconnection from their culture and cultural stories? How do we keep them engaged and interested in a way that is authentic and where we retain the power? And having,
Totally.
you know, the team from Eline coming into the community and training just dozens of people on how to make games, and them having full control and power over those games and the story
Yeah,
that it told. I think you can see it in the result. You can see it and you
totally.
can feel it when you're
You can
playing
feel
it.
it. Another really great game is Mulaka.
Yes,
They,
okay.
yeah, it's an Indigenous Mexican game, and
Writing this down.
yeah, they did a really beautiful job. They've got beautiful creatures in there. That's a cool game.
Oh, nice. What about you, Phoebe? Did Never Alone, was that your one?
Never, that was my one that I had. But like for me, like that, I remember actually playing that game before I even knew like that I was going to be something I was going to do. And now that I actually reflect on it, I remember having this one little thought, and it was, what if my culture and my language game? Because for people who haven't
Yes.
played, it's completely narrated in language, and it's all subtitled, and it's so beautiful. And I just remember that being a thought, and it's so inspirational. It's so
Yeah.
beautifully done.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was just such a beautiful example of you know, how Indigenous people are incredible storytellers. We've got some incredible stories that can be beautiful narrative-driven games that people all around the world can enjoy and learn more about our culture. And I think that that's really special and really exciting. So yeah, that's a cool one. Oh, cool to hear some new examples as well, though. I'm writing everything down so that I can play some. But I would like to stay on that storytelling aspect as well, and just talk a little bit about how we use storytelling and how that can be adapted to games, because there's stories within my culture that aren't meant to be heard by people outside the culture. There's some stories that's fine. There's some stories that are men's business. There's some stories that are women's business. How do we approach storytelling in games in an authentic and respectful kind of way? Phoebe, I'd like to stay with you on this for now.
Yeah, damn, hit me up with the hard first. Thank you. I mean, there are definitely like stories that are not meant to be shared, and I think that 100% needs to be respected. I think one of the main things that should be done is like keeping those storytellers like in control of their story. That's their story to share, and we know that things can be presented in different ways, and it could have different meanings depending on the context that it's in. So the context is super, super important. So if those storytellers have that control, they understand how one thing can affect another.
Absolutely. And how about you, Morgana? I'd like to hear your perspective on storytelling and how to do it appropriately.
Yeah. So we're a little bit different here in that we each have our iwi, what we call pūrākau, which are our traditional stories, and we very much leave each other's alone. Unless we wakapapa, or unless we genealogically link to that specific tribe, then we don't try to tell other people's stories. But a really big part of what we're trying to do in our game is maintaining the tikanga, or the cultural protocols and the language and the world. We're trying to maintain that and tell a story inside it that we have creative license over. So rather than telling a traditional story that already exists, we're creating a new story, but through our way of doing that. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Matiu, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, it's much the same. But I think it's really, really a cool thing to note that a lot of Indigenous cultures around the world have this rich history. It is history in our pūrākau and our pakiwaitara, all of the stories that are handed down from our ancestors. And that is, how we keep our culture going, how we learn all the histories, all the genealogies, all of these things. So as Māori and as Indigenous people, it is such a blessing that we have that. And it strengthens us in our kaupapa going forward, knowing that we can also create stories ourselves from this rich history that we already have. And I think it's important for Indigenous people to do this. We have a lot of really, really cool stories that we can share. We have a lot that we just won't share. Even, me to Morgana sort of stories, I just probably wouldn't ever share, but and vice versa. But I think it's important for Indigenous people to be in this place, especially in Te Ao Kemu and in the gaming world and in movies, in any sort of media, because it really is really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff from our histories, from our pūrākau that we can use and show. And we know from the history that we have today that the Western sort of presence in this industry want to use these stories. They want to showcase these stories because it is cool. And I respect that. But they don't have that mana. So it's not their stories to share. It's our stories to share. So we need to be in that place. Yeah.
I hear a lot from game creatives, people making games all around the world that do want to incorporate characters or culture or just elements within their game, or to have that representation. You've got these all white teams or majority white teams that are like, we should integrate some Indigenous culture in our game. It will be the right and respectful thing to do. In your opinion, is there a right and respectful way for non-Indigenous game developers to include Indigenous content, Matiu?
Is there a way for them to do this? They need to. It's hard.
It is hard. You have all the answers, and your answer will now be the test that all people hold themselves up against. No. In your opinion.
In my opinion, I think for the world, the first sort of image that they think of Māori is the haka and the full-face tāmoko sort of thing. I don't think people who don't have that whakapapa, that genealogy to those sorts of things, should be using these things. First of all, they don't understand the full concepts around those things. So it's sort of like a copy and paste sort of situation. If they want to be using these things, they need to have Indigenous people on their team. That's the simplicity of it.
But you, Morgana, what's your opinion on this? Just your opinion. You don't represent everyone. It's all right.
Yeah. No, I'll give my opinion. Don't worry about it. I'll give you my opinion and then I'll give you an example.
Yeah, good.
So my opinion is no, leave it alone. It's ours. It's not yours. Don't take it because they usually do a horrible job and it feeds into the stereotypes that we already have to deal with as Indigenous. That's my opinion. And an example, a really good example, a positive example, is that I was approached by a team. They're actually based in Canada, America, North America, and some are in Europe, and they are building a DLC for Elder Scrolls. And their original storyline was based on people that were inspired by Polynesian, they just said Polynesian. And they started creating the story. And then one of them was like, I don't think we're doing the right thing. And they literally Googled multicultural consultant and my name came up. So they got in contact with me. and they said, I think we're on the wrong track. I think we're about to appropriate something, do something really wrong. Can you help us out? I looked at their stuff and I was like, you are absolutely about to appropriate something. Yeah. So let's start again. And they basically gave me the reins to create the culture, the language, and the characters around the DLC. Remembering too that Elder Scrolls has its whole, is a world in itself. Yeah. That we're not necessarily trying to fit into, but that we're also trying to be part of. And so I also, with that, I was doing a cultural consultancy kind of situation, which was really helping me. The payback was that was teaching me how to put a game together, basically. And it's a massive team, you know, there's like 100 in there, you know, writing this DLC. And I asked Jojo, actually, our senior lead artist, to come in with me to create imagery for the DLC so that they knew exactly what they should and shouldn't be creating. So that's a really good example of what game makers should be doing, is literally coming to us. And if you get a no from somebody, like, and you're still trying to make the game, then you have to keep asking around. Because I think one thing that, and we can all, you know, attest to this as Indigenous, is that non-Indigenous will ask one Indigenous person, and if they get the yes, they think that's the yes on behalf of all of us, which is really annoying. Because that person may not necessarily be working on the actual game with them. You know, they might just say, oh yeah, use that, yeah, whatever it is, which can be really damaging. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
No, that's okay. I'm also just curious, how do you know which teams you can trust to work with? How do you choose who you're going to give consultation to, and how do you know that they're going to take your advice on board and, you know, not just chuck your name in the credits as a, you know, well, we've consulted with them and they said it was okay, even if they just ended up going off and doing their own thing and not actually taking your advice? It feels scary.
Yeah, I think their approach is really important, and I always, you know, always do a little bit of research. People are super easy to stalk.
Google their Twitter; they tell on themselves.
I think it's their approach. Like, if they come to me, and it's and this will be the game makers, for the game makers in the audience. If you approach with, we've got this idea and we want to do, and then we'd like you to, then you've already mucked it up, you've already messed up. Because if you're going to tell Indigenous stories or have Indigenous representation inside your game, you need to have those people with you from the beginning. You don't create something and then say, hey, what do you think of this? You literally
Can you tick this box for us, please?
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. And that's the biggest mistake, the most common mistake that all the and this isn't just the gaming industry, it's everywhere. When people ask for consultancy, they've already got this thing in their mind that they're coming with without that lens, without the Indigenous lens, and it's really annoying. So yeah, that's the bad approach, is to already have created something and then say, can you help us out? And the good approach is, we're thinking of doing this thing, would you like to come on board? Yes, we will pay you top dollar, and let them lead, or let us lead as Indigenous, let us lead that storyline and that storytelling.
Seeing you nodding along there, Phoebe, and you do a lot of work as a cultural consultant as well. What's your approach to working with teams? How do you decide who to work with, and what is a red flag for you?
Yeah, so I'm literally sitting here thinking, where's Morgana when I was like starting? Because like it's hard and it's scary. Like actually, like this is something that I like personally really struggle with, and it's not something I talk about a lot. Is there was no way for me to know who's a red flag. I was still in uni, fresh out of uni still. It's really hard for me to tell, and sometimes I do worry about, you know, is this team doing the right thing, and that's really hard. And I think, you know, for people who are in our position as like consultants or wanting to get into this position, just reach out and ask someone like who else is Indigenous, like here's my offer, what do you think of this, what do you think of this team, or other game developers, like do you know anything about this company? I think 100% it's super important to know who you're working for, because there are companies who are just wanting to tick that box. And
We've
once you know what to recognize, please. I think 100% is just knowing and learning, and not knowing as well is something that we do have to face. Like it's something that is like it is how companies treat it. It's like we are that consultant and we know everything, right? Like one piece of advice that I would give to any company is like, look after your consultants, because we're not just fitting into your timeline, we're fitting into our community's timeline and our own community structures of respect. And there's this whole other world that we have to navigate as people to fit, to give you one little outcome, which might be a yes or no kind of answer,
Yeah, that doesn't take 24 hours to get a yes or no question.
No, question. Exactly.
You mentioned there feeling a little bit alone, like just kind of being thrust into this world and not really knowing who to be able to trust. Are you aware of any programs or pathways that people in your position now, having been in the industry for a little while, that they could go down to be able to get some support?
I mean, I'm always open on my Twitter if there's Indigenous like creatives out there who aren't sure. More than happy to give my like help. Personally, I actually like, in terms of like as an Indigenous creator, in game space specifically, other than like Indigitech and like similar, like for developers, I don't actually personally know of any. So if anyone here does, please share. But yeah, like I think because games itself is already like, it's pretty much a baby in terms of media, but having our culture in games is so shiny brand new at the moment that we are navigating this space and in a way like testing the waters of where to go, and that in itself can be terrifying. You don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to accidentally, contribute to damages for culture and representation and things like that. So there's a lot of work that I think that needs to be done in terms of supporting Indigenous creators, young Indigenous creators coming to this space, especially.
Morgana, what about over there? What's the support like there?
We've got some really cool pockets of things happening. Like I say, we're like few and far between. There's quite a few in the tech industry, but in the gaming industry inside that, there's a few of us. So just for our audience from Aotearoa, first thing that comes to mind is Ngāti Gaming, because they are a massive Discord group that really innovate in the way that they stream on Twitch. They have total immersion sessions where for 10 minutes, they'll just speak te reo Māori while they're gaming. They're also creating, innovating and creating new language that makes sense in te reo Māori, but also like things like, words for build-ups and, I'm just trying to think of all the things we say in game now. My mind's gone blank. But in te reo, so that our rangatahi, our youth coming up, who are gaming now but are still wanting to stay connected with their ta'a Māori or their Māori side, can do that while in the game and while connecting with other gamers. So they're really cool. There's a few groups here, yeah.
Beautiful. Matiu, have you engaged with any of these groups? Are you aware of any kind of support out there for Indigenous game makers?
I think as Māori, we're really good at, as Morgana said, coming together. I'm not personally aware of many of these groups. I know Ngāti Gaming, but I think just as Māori, we do really well coming together. And I think that's quite a Indigenous quality. I think a lot of Indigenous people do really well as a community. So if they're ever in need of any help in any sort of thing, reaching out to your family and your wider community and your friends as quite a good support network, which I think, going back to colonization, is actually a hard thing to break through as a individual person. That reaching out, I think that's been suppressed quite a bit, which is sad. So for any Indigenous people that are watching and feel like that, really honestly, just reach out. Even if you're not Māori, reach out to us Māori. We love
it. Yeah, that's so true. I don't think there's actually specific groups. There is code actually down in South Island, and there is the native Otawa and them, and I can't remember the name, that's okay, where they are specific to gaming and bringing our kids up in coding and stuff like that. But yeah, Matu's absolutely right. Like we just all say, hey, kia ora, I'm from the East Coast, I'm from the West Coast, this is me, what are you guys doing? We usually just kind of connect up like that. But another Māori in the room, choice.
Yeah, we just do the whole, who's your mob? Where you from? Oh, yeah, all right. Oh, my nan's sister. Yeah, all right, cool. We're cousins. Great.
Pretty much.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's probably less of a formal thing with an acronym and a social media presence, and more of an informal community thing. And I would hate the idea of there being some young or even just new Indigenous people in games that are feeling alone.
Totally.
Just want to put the word out. Anyone watching, feel free to reach out to me. I know Phoebe feels the same. Reach out to the mob at Indigitech. There's a whole community waiting for you. So definitely not alone. And speaking of community and Indigitech, I have some questions from our Indigitech Discord, which is an awesome place where basically a whole bunch of nerds have managed to come together and form our little groups of particularly nerdy things we're interested in. There's the D&D group, there's writers, there's gamers, there's streamers, there's all sorts of people in there. Feel free to reach out to the Indigitech team to join. And the first question that has come through is a big one, and it is, what does decolonization mean to you? Phoebe, I'll throw it to you first.
Again, the big one.
They're all hard questions, sis, sorry.
Decolonizing for me personally is a lot about, seeing mob in these spaces and having that freedom to be in these spaces and do it how we want to do it, and not follow non-Indigenous, ways that they think a game should be made with certain deadlines and whatnot. That's what it means to me, is being able to create what we want, how we want.
What about you, Matiu? Yeah, no, perfect. Matiu, what does decolonization mean to you?
I think it's about going forward and re-indigenizing all the spaces that you're in. As a person who is Indigenous, for someone who's not Indigenous, this probably looks scary from the outside, but it's not. We're just doing our thing and we're loving it. There's no reason to be all up in arms about any of that. We're not trying to colonize the colonizers. We're just trying to re-indigenize ourselves.
Speak for yourself, nah.
Well, yeah, I do speak for myself. I don't speak for everyone.
What about you, Morgana? What does decolonization mean to you? Don't hold back. They can take it.
The initial journey is always a personal one. So I think always learning more, speaking the language, living the life, You know, it's like it starts in the home for me. I have children, so, you know, we speak te reo as their first language, and we follow tikanga, we follow protocols every single day. It's very boring and annoying for them. It's normal for them, which is so great. But then the flip side of that for me is totally along the lines of what Matiu was saying, is taking up space. We've been used to diminishing ourselves for so long, especially growing up, you know, like Phoebe, what you said about growing up, that really resonated with me, because I was really proud to be Māori. We did kapahaka, you know, our Māori performing arts, but we were only allowed to be Māori in that space. And I wanted to do that all the time, everywhere. And now I do. And with that, you know, with that, the serious side, of course, is that we are literally walking political statements. So, you know, being Indigenous and being a woman as well is very confronting. And then, of course, we wear our traditional moko on our bodies, and it's very confronting for people. And I'm like, so I don't care. I'm gonna do me. Yeah, it's just like being one rule. It was kind of like this. It wasn't really a rule. It was more like a tikanga that we kind of built in our team, was being unapologetically Māori. So, which is why whenever we present or whenever we're together, we're just like, we're in it, we live it, you know, and we just take up that space unapologetically. We're just like, yeah, we're Māori and we're here. We're not going anywhere. We're going to speak our language. We're going to do what we do our way, total autonomy, full stop. Kia ora, thank you. Bye.
Can I just jump in there real quickly and I just want to add that also, like, giving Indigenous people the freedom to make what they want, but that doesn't necessarily have to be Indigenous or representative, like, in a way. Like, I think it's absolutely fantastic that Morgana lives her absolute life in every facet. Like, it's so strong and powerful, and it's so important. But as well, like, you know, if you're Indigenous, like, it doesn't have to be that for your work to be still Indigenous work. It comes from you as well. And I think that's super important, that I just wanted to slide in.
Yeah,
no, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, we're at this end of the spectrum. There's a spectrum of indigeneity that people feel and own and are still learning about. So there are definitely, and these are the people that I'd love to inspire in our audience, there are definitely Indigenous people out there who are not connected, who are disconnected and disenfranchised, and feel like they can't because they're not Māori enough, or they're, you know what I mean? They're not Indigenous enough. And I think, like, the opportunities like this to be in spaces where you know, you wouldn't usually see us is so great. Like, that's the beginning of hopefully inspiring more Indigenous people to get into the industry.
Let's cross how good would that be? I've got another question here. What are some specific ways that streamers, gamers, members of the community, game developers can work to decolonize game spaces? Now, I'm gonna take that to mean online communities as well as workplaces as well. Morgana, I'll go back to you.
Oh gosh. I was like, please choose Matiu.
Matiu. I'll go to you on this.
Okay, what was the question?
What are some specific ways that people either working in, you know, games media or streamers, or, you know, in the games community, or game developers as well, what are some specific ways they can work to decolonize those gaming spaces?
Oh, okay. I think this is it should be an easy one for Indigenous people, because just stop, like, coming at it from that Western perspective. Whatever you're doing, we've found for Fork Feeds, every time we've come together and we're creating some cool stuff, we take a look at it and we're like, hang on, we've just come at this from a full Hollywood perspective. Let's take a step back, re-look at all of the stuff that we've done. Hang on, look at this. We came at that from a real Māori perspective. Let's hone in on that. And when we've followed our tikanga, our protocols and all of that sort of stuff, it's actually fit even more nicely than it would have. which has been hugely enlightening for me. My main mahi, my main job isn't actually in gaming. I'm a landscaper. So taking on board what I've learned through 4Phase and placing it in my own work has been super awesome for me.
Yeah.
I just feel super proud to represent my beliefs and my culture in everything that I do. So yeah, that's from the Indigenous perspective. How does that look for non-Indigenous people? I think, first of all, if you've got Indigenous people in that space, really try and engage with them on what those things are. And if they can be incorporated, just go hard and incorporate it. That's awesome. If you're not Indigenous and you've got no Indigenous people, stay true to your own tikanga. That's your culture. Stay true to that. And that's going to inspire you the same as it inspires us in our culture, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Phoebe, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can mainly speak to the games developer space because that's where I spend all my time apparently. But I can use examples for this. But I'm on a project with Star Stable Entertainment based over in like Switzerland. I've got a few people from the US as well. But myself and one other person was brought on as writers, but we were brought onto the team for our Indigenous perspective. Not necessarily because they wanted to make a piece of content that is Indigenous in any kind of way, but just broadening their team a little bit with different backgrounds and cultures can just influence so many different things: game mechanics, stories, the way stories are told, ideas for literally every facet of game design. You never know. So just by having a larger range of backgrounds, we'll just inherently have that. But also I'm on a team, I'm with Guck, working on our unannounced project at the moment, and that is an Indigenous-led project. And the space and the way that we are producing this game is unlike anything that I've learned at uni. It's like, it just feels a little bit crazy, but it's just at times, but it's just so free-flowing and creative. And like I know my boss, she bought us like all these yowies, like the little yowie toys that you'd get in the chocolate. She bought the entire first series so we could play with them and hold them in our hands. And you have no idea, like, I'm not even, she mailed them to me in lockdown. And just by like fiddling with these little things, have so many inspirations.
What do you got there, a Bilby?
I've got like a little Bilby. I've got everything in here. And we've been to Hillsville Sanctuary and just looked at not just the animals, but like we stopped to look at the trees and the plants. And it sometimes it may seem like in the moment, like, why are we here? Like, this is seem very like we're not getting much done here. But the amount of things that have actually inspiration that has grown from those, and just the processes, it's just not as westernized. It could be terrifying for producers. Like, what are they doing? They're going on field trips and just looking at the animals. Like, this isn't productive. But like, you literally never know where your inspiration is going to come from, because little chocolatey toys, 100%.
Nice.
Morgana, did you have any thoughts that you'd like to add about how people can contribute to decolonizing their workplace or their online spaces?
Yeah. For Indigenous, here's the thing, like, being a consultant, I always tell people everyone is Indigenous to somewhere. So even so the hard basket would be that everyone finds their whakapapa, that everyone seeks out their entire genealogy. So if you are not Indigenous to the land that you live in, that you actually seek out your old ways. It's probably going to be Norse or Celtic, somewhere around there, up by the Arctic somewhere, and you embrace your indigeneity. Because as soon as people become embodied in their own culture, they begin to understand what colonization feels like, and they tend not to want to take and steal. So that's my whole thing with non-Indigenous people, is to go and learn where you're actually from and practice those cultures, because they're beautiful. They're usually linked to, usually always go back to the environment, and have a pantheon, not just one god, the same. For our Indigenous people, it's definitely learning about yourself if you can, as much as you can. And whatever space that you're in, again, it seems a little bit repetitive, but whatever space you're in, to take up that space fully. Like, don't try not to diminish your own mana for other people's comfort. And I know that can be hard, especially for young people. I say that now as a fully grown woman, but I remember not being that confident when I was younger, and the thing that built my confidence in order to decolonize the way that I saw the world was to learn about who I was and where I came from. Because once you learn about that, this entire world that existed, and now you're part of that, this whole line, you realize the mana behind that. And it basically makes you invincible. It makes you unstoppable, for real.
Yeah.
No
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
I think for non-Indigenous people working with Indigenous people, can I just ask really politely, with a weapon in my hand,
With your fidget,
with my fidget spinner, can you not expect Indigenous people to run the Indigenous things? Like, we're gonna do it, but can you just not have the expectation? Because what that is continuing the colonization of our people. So instead of expecting your Indigenous people to provide all the answers, can you please take it on yourselves to, start the steps into researching that stuff with them? Because, a lot of Indigenous people might not have that strong connection to the culture. And that can be quite a daunting thing, to have suddenly expected to know that stuff. Yeah. That's what I wanted to add.
No, it's perfect. And I think, particularly for Indigenous people working in largely non-Indigenous spaces, where they might be the only Indigenous person working in that entire company, they're at huge risk of tokenization and of being the go-to person, essentially the unpaid cultural consultant on top of whatever job it is that they were hired to do in the first place. So they end up being stretched so thin, and this is something that we all encounter in all workplaces, no matter whether it's in games or not. So yeah, I think being respectful of the fact that, yes, you've hired an Indigenous person, but the onus still needs to be on them whether or not they're going to provide you with cultural knowledge. You can't just come to them all day with questions. They're trying to get the job done.
Totally.
And if you receive an answer that's like, I don't know, that's not my mob, don't get upset with them. I'm just saying.
It's so true.
Speaking of, I do have another question that's come through from the Discord, which is, and I think I know the answer to this one from across the board from all of you. And Matiu, I'm going to go to you first specifically for this reason. If I don't have the budget for cultural consultation, should I still seek it out?
Always. So, if you don't have the budget, make the budget. Because if you're using Indigenous stuff, you need to have that budget. Otherwise, don't make Indigenous stuff. And I think if the budget is tight, start researching that stuff yourself. I know in New Zealand, there's a lot of free resources for you to learn these things. So go hard, do it. Kara whio.
Phoebe, how do you feel about this?
I 100% agree. I think we need to be paid for our time. If you don't have the budget, what are you trying to make?
Yeah.
You need to reassess this project. If you don't have the budget for it, then you got your priorities mixed up. I'm sorry. Like you said, you make budget, you take it out of somewhere else, and you rework that, because 100%.
Beautiful. And Morgana?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you've got budget for a programmer, you've got budget for a consultant, cultural consultant, for real.
That's it. Beautiful final words. Unfortunately, that is all that we have time for. Mandanguwu, everyone, thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you all.
Ngā mihi, kia ora.
Thank you.